Today's recipe is a little more challenging. In fact, the only other time I've tried it, I ruined it. What makes it so difficult is that it has two components to it. The crust, which can be intimidating on its own, and the filling, which is a custard and is hard to predict. But this was only my second attempt, and I think it turned out perfectly. If I can do it, you can do it. So let's begin, shall we? For our pie crust, we're going to start with 1 stick of butter. While some pie crusts call for shortening, which makes for a flakier crust, I prefer the taste of a buttery crust. To make it easier to combine with the flour, I cut the butter into tablespoons, then cut each tablespoon into 4 cubes. We'll then put our butter cubes in a bag to put in the freezer overnight. The reason for freezing the butter is simple. We want to keep it as cold as possible before we start rolling it out for our pie crust. The colder the butter, the flakier the crust. If the butter is too warm, it will combine too much with the flour, making the dough harder to work with. The end result will be a crust that's too tough. In the bowl of your favorite food processor, we're going to add 1 1/4 cups of flour. Follow that up with a ½ teaspoon of salt. Then we're going to pulse a couple of times just to combine the flour and the salt. The last step before we pull the butter out of the freezer is to get a cup of ice cold water. It's important that the water be ice cold because we don't want anything warming the butter up as we start to incorporate it with the flour. Then we take the butter directly from the freezer, put it into the food processor, and we're going to want to pulse about 6 to 8 times just to start to incorporate the butter into the flour. Now it's time to start adding in our ice water. You'll need anywhere from 5 to 8 tablespoons of the ice water. You want to start adding them in 1 to 2 tablespoons at a time, giving a quick pulse or two to incorporate the water into the mixture. Try pinching some of the crumbly dough together with your fingers. If it doesn't hold together, then it's not quite ready. You'll want to add another 1 to 2 tablespoons of ice water and try pulsing again another couple of times. After 4 tablespoons of ice water, my dough still isn't quite ready yet, so I'm going to add 1 more tablespoon of ice water and give it another couple of quick pulses, and that should be enough. What we're looking for is a coarse mixture with pea-sized pieces of butter. This is starting to look pretty good, so I think I'm about done. Now it's time to dump our mixture out onto a clean surface and start working it into a flat disc. You do not want to over knead. You should just be able to see little bits of butter in the dough. The whole process only took me about 3 minutes. Now this last step is optional, but I put my pie crust in a pie bag to make it easier to roll out. To start the filling, we're going to need to separate 2 eggs. The device that you see at the bottom of the screen is an egg separator. Basically just crack the egg into the top of it, shake it around a few times. The egg white falls down into the container below while the yolk stays in the container above. You move the yolk over to a separate bowl, move the egg white into a second bowl. You would want to do these one at a time in case you accidentally break one of the yolks, so that way you don't ruin the whole batch. As for the reason why we're separating the eggs, that will become clear later in the video. The next ingredient in our filling is 6 tablespoons of melted oleo, which is short for oleomargarine, or just margarine. This is a very common ingredient that you're likely to find if you look through your grandmother's old cookbooks. It gained popularity during the 1940s and 50s due to the butter shortages caused by rationing in World War II, but began to decline in popularity as studies found that butter was healthier. For my recipe, I just used country crock and it worked just fine. To the bowl with the egg yolks, you're going to want to add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a 1/2 cup of sugar, granulated, and 2 cups of cottage cheese. The whole milk version works the best. Then you want to stir to combine. Basically just make sure that the egg yolks and the sugar get dissolved in the cottage cheese. Then you'll want to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Then add in 3/4 cup milk. Again, whole milk works best. Then finally, the secret ingredient, cook and serve Jell-O. The type that I'm using here, custard, has sadly been discontinued, but you should be able to find similar flavors such as vanilla on your grocery store shelves. Now back to the egg whites. Bet you forgot about this bowl. I am adding in a little bit of sugar to help with the beating process, then using a hand mixer to beat them into stiff peaks. It only took me about 45 seconds or so, and these egg whites definitely look stiff to me. Finally, we combine the egg whites with the rest of our custard. You want to gently fold the egg whites into the custard, being careful to not overmix. After all, the egg whites in this mixture do provide some of the leavening in our custard. Now we roll out the pie crust. It's been sitting in the refrigerator for about an hour now. If it's too hard to work with, you can always let it sit at room temperature for about 10 minutes or so, but not too much longer. I am sprinkling a little bit of flour in my pie bag to help keep it from sticking, then using a rolling pin to roll it out inside the bag. This helps keep it in a circular shape that's just the right size for my pie dish. A little tip for transferring your pie crust over to your pie plate, just put the pie dish down upside down on top of the dough, then flip, and voila! As I started pouring the custard into the pie crust, I began to realize that I was going to have a lot of extra filling. In the event that this happens to you, it's best to be prepared with 1 or 2 custard cups. That way we don't waste any of the yummy goodness. With the oven preheated to 325, my pie is ready to go in, very carefully. Now the recipe I have said to bake for 80 to 90 minutes or until set, but that recipe also was for 2 pies. And remember what happened last time? I'm setting a timer for 30 minutes and I'll check the pies then. This part's going to require a little trial and error. At 30 minutes, my pie is still a little too wobbly in the center. After about 40 minutes, it's looking better but still not quite done yet. At around 46 minutes, it's starting to brown a little on top and was a little less wobbly in the center. I decided to pull mine out then. Hey look, it's a hidden Mickey. Please don't sue me, Disney.